Any better there? Can you hear us now?
Oh, yeah, now it's working.
Okay, there you go. So I'm not going to interfere here. I'll step out. The only thing is, we wanted to capture a recording, so I don't want to push the envelope. Totally your call, Destiny. But do you care if I sit here without talking and capture OBS on my end so that we have a version of it?
Go,
If
whatever
not,
you
that's okay.
knock yourself out.
Okay, well, I'm just gonna mute then. You won't hear from me anymore. But yeah, thanks for taking the conversation or debate. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Hello, hello.
Hey,
Hi, what's up?
yeah, so I was trying. I mean, I actually haven't watched any of these debates, but I've just been sort of told by people that you have been attacking the labor theory of value, and I wanted to see if I could get you to explain exactly what the position is.
Yeah, I don't know what the point is. Why, like, I don't know why you would ever use that form of analysis.
So you understand? Well, why don't you explain to me why is it that you think it's so surprising? Because I guess I don't understand what the incredulity is about.
I mean, like, it seems like there are a couple of issues in terms of like rationalizing it or making it work. There are a couple of assumptions, so related to like the transformation problem, and it feels like modern economic theory can explain everything pretty adequately. I don't know why we would use like the labor theory of value to explain anything ever.
Well, what is it that you think modern economic theory explains that the labor theory of value? I'm sorry, I guess what is it that you think the labor theory of value explains that the modern economic theory explains better?
The relationship between the like productions of commodities, the relationship between like capital labor and the production of commodities.
I guess I don't understand. So, like, what exactly is the datum that the labor theory of value is seeking to explain? That
Isn't the labor theory of value just supposed to relate like the like labor and capital and commodities produced? Isn't it just supposed to be a way to like relate all of these things and to find them in common terms?
I don't think so.
Okay, tell me what you think it is, or what is it for you?
It's an attempt to theorize the dynamics of the capitalist mode of production.
Wait, can you tell me what the difference is between what you just said and what I said?
I didn't understand what you said.
Okay, can you explain what that means, what you just said?
So, the idea is we want to understand what it is that, how it is that a capitalist economy will develop over time and understand what explains those dynamics, right? That's what the aim of the theory is, right? To attempt to determine the evolution of the capitalist mode of production, right? How a capitalist economy will evolve over time, right?
Okay. I guess I didn't get that far in my understanding of it. I thought that the labor theory of value was just like an incredibly like relational thing that is able to let you determine the value of like commodities based on like the input forces. Or
well, it does attempt to determine value, but value on the labor theory of value is a technical term.
Well, every term in anything is a technical term. Or what do you mean? Of course.
What I mean is that it doesn't mean the same thing as it does in other economic theories,
well,
or
of course,
even
that's
in
because
ordinary parlance.
Sure, of course.
Yeah, and see, so I think that raises an issue about how it is that modern economic theories,
estimated
to use your
50
term,
Swedish,
is able to do what the labor theory of value does better.
Well, but what is the point? Yeah, I guess, but like, so my biggest problem with the labor theory of value is, like, I don't know what value means, and I think that the definition of it is incredibly murky and like very circular. And
well, I can try. Well, wait a minute. Okay,
sure.
So I'm not sure why you would say that it's circular.
Okay, can you tell me? Well, I'll just ask a few questions then, and you can try to explain it to me. So
All right.
can you tell me how to figure out the value of a good or service using the labor theory of value, or the value of a commodity?
Are you asking what on the theory the value is understood to be?
Yep.
The value of a commodity is understood to be?
Mm-hmm.
So value on the labor theory of value
Mm-hmm.
is it's what's called a theoretical unobservable, right? Do you
Mhm.
understand what a theoretical unobservable is?
I can guess by what theoretical and unobservable mean, but
Well,
go
I
ahead.
just mean that's a technical term in philosophy of science, right? It's something that's posited that isn't directly observed, right? But that's posited to explain some phenomena,
Okay.
right? It's kind of like an electron or something like that, right? Like you don't see an electron, right? But you posit them in a theory in order to
I don't know if I would compare
explain
an electron that's like
observations.
a testable thing to like just something that we arrive at via pure reason, right? I think that these are two fundamentally different things.
What makes you think that value is not testable?
Because whatever value is going to be here is probably something that you're going to arrive at through a set of axioms that doesn't necessarily have to map onto a real world. It doesn't have to be like an observable thing. I think that's different than something you test for, like an
The
electron.
point of the theory, right, is to actually explain
I'm
observations.
gonna lose my mind
right?
in
It's
this
actually
conversation.
meant to
I'm gonna
predict
lose my mind in this conversation. Oh my god,
phenomena.
I'm not gonna be able to do it, guys.
So I don't see why it would be any different from an electron.
Okay, sure. So I guess like my question there then. So we didn't really define value at all. I understand, but or maybe we can go back to that. But because once we get through your set of definitions, my question is going to be: is what does the labor theory value predict that I can't under current economic models?
Yeah,
He's going to
well,
say the
there's a
falling
bunch
rate
of
of profits.
predictions.
Please don't do it. Please don't do falling rate of profits. Please don't say it. He's going to say it. It's the first
So
thing
we
he's gonna
can
say.
we can talk
Please
about
don't say it,
those.
please. Yeah, can you
So
just give me
just-
like one prediction? I'm just curious. Like, what is something that like, oh, I have like this economic question, and the labor theory of value gives me a really clear answer, and I can't understand this using like contemporary economics.
It's not a question of not being able to understand things, right? What the theory attempts to do is determine the laws of motion of the capitalist mode of production, right? So the idea is this is what this is how we
He's
should
rambling
expect
so
to see
much. It makes me
a
think it doesn't
capitalist economy unfold.
have a good answer
over
for me.
time.
It's going to be the falling rate of profits. Yeah. So what is like? So on that line of thought, we should be able to get like what is like a prediction that the LBT
Yeah,
makes.
there's probably about close to a dozen.
Yeah, can I just want one? I'm just curious, like one.
Yeah, so one would be
Don't say
that-
it. He's gonna say it. Oh no.
workers will receive in the long run a declining share of the total value product.
Can you explain why?
Well, to explain why, we'd have to talk a lot about the labor theory of value, what the labor theory of value is, right? So if you want a lesson on the labor theory of value, that's fine. We can have a little seminar on it. But there's not going to be like some simple answer that you're going to understand unless you're acquainted with the details of the theory.
Okay, so I think you have a severe problem with whatever framework you're using if you can't like explain something and make somebody understand it. Like if it has to be
I
obfuscated.
didn't say
fine.
I couldn't explain it, and I didn't say that you couldn't understand it. I said it wouldn't be a simple matter to do so. And it wouldn't
Is there a
just
way that you
take a
can
few minutes.
summarize? And this is like a 30-minute lesson to make me understand this.
I can try to take you through 30 minutes of introductory material on the labor theory of value and see if we can get there. But I can't promise that in 30 minutes you'll understand why the theory predicts that there should be a declining share of the total value product accruing to workers as a secular tendency.
And you can't explain that in any kind of common parlance. You can only explain that through your framework. There's no way that you can.
I don't know what you mean by explaining it in a common parlance, right?
So when
can
I say
tell you
common
all
parlance,
the-
what I mean is using words that most people could understand. You can give like a general explanation of like, oh, well, this thing will probably happen because of like these forces. You can't do that outside
so,
of speaking.
You know, I don't really understand. Like, you
He
think
doesn't seem to understand
think
much
like
of
that
anything.
if I was
Jesus
giving
Christ.
an explanation in terms of marginal utility theory, that would involve common parlance?
Yeah, of course. Easily. For sure. Yes.
I don't think so. If I say to you marginal product of capital, do you know what that means?
Does this have to do with like the production, the marginal production, fucking formula or whatever? Basically, the idea of that, like, fuck, I forgot what this means. But yes, you can explain this.
Yeah,
like,
it's not common parlance.
Yeah, no,
right?
no, no.
That's a
But
technical term.
no. But I can look this up and
Right.
I can explain it to you in like 2 seconds.
Yeah, well, you can look up any term that I use in the labor theory of value and discover its meaning, just like you can in mainstream economic theories, right?
Mhm.
These are scientific theories, and so they're going to employ specialized vocabulary. So I just don't understand what the objection is.
Okay. So the marginal product of capital means that it's the extra bit that you can make every time you add a little bit more capital, right? That would be like a common parlance explanation of like what the marginal product of capital is, right? So if you add like another oven to a fast food restaurant, the more burgers that you can make as a result of doing that or whatever, there's going to be like a marginal addition to where you can only add so many more ovens and get so many more burgers out. I feel like it's like a relatively simple thing to understand. I don't need to talk for 45 minutes to explain that to somebody.
Look, I don't understand, right? You don't actually know what labor theory of value is, right? You're not actually. If I asked you, tell me what labor theory of value is, could you tell me?
I'd have to go look it up again, but I thought it was basically like capital plus like socially necessary labor equals like whatever commodity you produce or whatever, something like that.
No. Well, that's not it. But yeah, I mean, it's not totally. You're not like, it seems like you're sort of like badly reproducing
Okay, I don't know if you've
something that
understood
is
this or not, but
correct.
you've said absolutely nothing of substance in the past like 15 minutes. Like all you've said over and over again is it's complicated. I can't explain. Like, I feel like this is.
I think
I feel like this is a you problem.
We need to get clear. Yeah, so we need
Yeah.
to get clear on something, right?
Go for it.
You don't actually know what the theory is, right? You just
Okay.
have some vague idea about it, right?
Sure.
Okay, so you're not now. So what I'm trying to understand is
Uh-huh.
how are you in a position to evaluate the theory if you don't even know what the theory is?
Because
right?
I've read other people's evaluations on it, and it seems like horseshit. Nobody contemporaneously
fine.
uses
That's fine
like
if
labor
it
theory
seems-
value.
I don't-
I
look,
know that there are
I
big
don't
problems
care-
associated
I don't
with it. So
care.
why would I spend
Yeah,
all of my
I don't
time
care.
reading about like,
I'm not-
oh, well, this is
well,
exactly what the labor theory values when
look,
nobody uses it in modern day. Like, there's a million other things that I would study that would be more relevant to understanding
fine.
economics today than the labor theory
It's fine
value.
if you don't. It's fine if you don't understand it, right? Now, if you think that entitles you to attack it,
I don't
then
attack
I'm
it.
gonna
I'm not.
wanna
I'm not.
hear
I
the
don't. I don't sit here and say like, oh, by the way, like, here's my Destiny's debunking of the labor theory of value. The problem is that every time I talk to somebody that purports to be a huge supporter of the labor theory of value, whenever I ask them really basic questions like, oh, well, like, what's a prediction that the LVT can make that I can't make under like marginalism or marginal utility or whatever? Instead, I get somebody that will babble for 20
Well, I
minutes
gave
saying
you a
like,
prediction.
Sure, and then you
I
told me
gave you a
you did you
prediction, right? And then
rambled.
you
No.
asked-
So
then
you
you
ran. What
asked
you
how
did
the
was you
theory-
rambled off a sentence, and then you said you can't explain why
I
without
didn't
spending.
ramble.
You did. You rambled off something
No.
and said you can't explain why without going into an hour of discussion.
Yeah, so you seem to think that a scientific theory, right?
It's
is
not a
somehow
scientific. What do you mean by
required-
a scientific theory?
You don't know what a science is?
Is the philosophy of the labor theory of value a scientific theory now, or I mean, like,
Labor theory of value is a scientific theory,
okay.
right? Is that what you're contesting? That
I don't
it's
know.
not
Can you
science?
tell me how you test the labor theory of value? What is like an experiment we
Yeah,
can run
what
on
you
it?
do is you figure out what predictions are derivable from the theory,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you look and see whether those predictions have come true.
How do you even make predictions though when some of your inputs are these like vacuous things like socially necessary labor?
Wait, why do you say that that's vacuous?
How do you measure it? If you can't tell me how you measure it, by the way, it's vacuous. So this is a pretty important answer, and it's going to need to be more than it's going to take me an hour to explain. How do you measure like what
So-
socially necessary labor is?
The average quantity of unskilled labor time that it takes to reproduce a commodity?
So how do you explain the fact that value seems so inadequately mapped onto price? That there's such huge differences that we would expect to see like
It's not
similar.
a theory of prices.
Sure, but if value doesn't map onto price ever, what the fuck is value? Why do we care about that variable? What does value mean to
Right.
us?
So The reason why we care about that variable is because what we observe when we look at commodity prices over time is that there's a long-run equilibrium price, right? And so values are actually posited to explain those prices.
So a value is supposed to explain the long-term equilibrium price, as in like the final price that a good or service will meet when what equilibrium is reached?
So do you know what a long-run equilibrium price is?
No, go ahead and explain it to me, okay?
So, like, if we take a given commodity, say a loaf of bread or an airplane or something like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can look at the market price over time, right? And what we'll observe is that supply and demand fluctuations will cause market prices to oscillate around a basic axis, right? Which is the equilibrium price or long run.
How can you say that
average
there's like a
price.
long run equilibrium price on any given commodity though, when like demand for certain things changes all the time, or even like supplies for things can change over time?
Well, the point is that's something that what the basic idea is going to be that although the prices of bread and airplanes vary depending on supply and demand fluctuations, it's going to be the case that in the long run, the cost of an airplane is going to be many thousands of times more than that of a loaf of bread.
We don't know that. That's not necessarily true.
I didn't say it was necessarily true, right? That's what's been observed, right? Which is how the labor theory of value got formulated in the first place. Because the idea was that people became aware of this phenomenon that there were long-run average prices.
How are there long run average prices when there are new goods and services that are springing up all the time? I don't understand what that means, especially when you talk about something like.
Why would there be an inconsistency between those two things?
I just don't know like a particular good or service that is going to have anything that I would be comfortable calling a long run equilibrium. Like what's the long run equilibrium on like a Nintendo 64 or the long run equilibrium on like a calculator from, the year 1940?
I'm not really sure I understand what you're contesting, right? Do you think it's not the case that
Okay, hold on. I'm going to rephrase this, and if you can't understand this, then we can talk again later, because these questions are incredibly simple. So I don't know if you're being evasive or if you're just pretending to not understand what I'm asking. So it sounds to me that what you're saying is that we should see some long-term equilibrium, some settling of price that happens with any given good or service. What I'm telling you is that it feels to me, I'm sorry, let me phrase this a little stronger. What I'm telling you is that there are different types of goods and services that appear over time. The demand for these can dramatically change from one point in history to another, such that I don't know if a price will necessarily settle on some equilibrium. So for instance, you gave the example earlier, well, a plane might always cost more than a loaf of bread, but theoretically, there could be a future where climate change dramatically curbs our ability to farm, and all of a sudden bread will become far, far, far more valuable than a plane, even when it comes to producing it. So I don't understand how you can so confidently say that we will observe these equilibrium prices when there are new goods and services that appear all the time.
Yeah, so what I said is that they have been observed, right?
But they haven't been observed. I'm telling you they haven't. So there is no equilibrium price today, unless you're saying the equilibrium price of everything goes to zero as the demand for it disappears, except for some like essential goods or services. Like cotton looms probably aren't as in demand, in Marx's or today as they were in Marx's time, as we've gotten better capital to weave fabrics.
Yeah, so I'm not claiming, right, that all goods remain in production.
He's not claiming anything.
Right,
I don't understand.
for all time,
Oh my
right?
God.
I'm saying
I hate
that
these conversations
when they're in
so much.
production, right,
Oh,
over the
God.
term of their history of being in production, right, what's been observed is, well, at least what's believed to have been observed, right, is that there are these long-run average prices, so-called equilibrium prices, right?
Why would we observe these
and
prices?
so
Or go ahead.
given
Sorry, go ahead.
given that economists have observed those things, right, or have believed to observe those things, right? They think they're seeing an equilibrium price, right? What they tried to do then was try to figure out what determines the equilibrium price, right? And the reasoning was that given that supply and demand cancel each other out at equilibrium, right, it's not actually going to be supply and demand that do the explaining, right? Something else has to explain it.
Wait, why is that? Can you explain that? Why is that? What do you mean by it cancels out?
So if supply is equal to demand, that's the point of equilibrium, right?
Okay.
So we understand that supply, increases in supply at the same schedule of demand are going to cause the price to fall below the equilibrium. Similarly, increases of demand at the same supply are going to cause the price to rise above equilibrium,
Sure.
right? So we understand that supply and demand will determine the deviation of the market price from the equilibrium price, right?
Okay.
The point is, though, when supply is equal to demand, that doesn't tell us why supply equals demand at that point rather than at some other point, right?
Well, isn't it just because there's a certain quantity demanded at a certain price? Isn't that all that means?
Well, question is, why is it that in the long run we have this basic stability?
Because there's a scarcity of resources. People only have so much money that they can spend on so many products, and it's up to them to figure out the utility of any given product and how much they're willing to spend on it.
Well, I don't know whether that's a good answer or not, right? You'd have to show me how you can actually provide some kind of like mathematizable model.
I'm sure if you talk to somebody in econometrics that there's like a billion different models where people try to figure out like how much money people would be willing to spend on something.
That may be the case, right? What I'm saying is that the theorists of the labor theory of value came up with their own theory, right, of equilibrium prices, right? And their theory was that what determined the equilibrium price was quantities of labor, right? Now that idea was refined over time. It became quantities of labor to average quantities of unskilled labor time with some further conditions, right? Now the interesting thing about that is that when you actually have that account in place, that theoretical account in place, you can then generate other predictions of the long run dynamics of capitalist economies. And that's how it is that we can find confirmation and or possible disconfirmation of the theory, like in any other scientific theory. Right.
I guess I don't know how you figure out like when do you decide in your theory when you've reached like equilibrium pricing, when the value and the price match? Like how do you ever make that declaration? How do you know?
I don't think you need to know that.
So then what does value represent?
So again, value is understood to be an average quantity of unskilled labor time that it takes to reproduce a good at a given time or place, right? That's what's understood to determine value.
Yeah, I've never understood how you, like that unskilled labor time, like there are multiple things that we could create using unskilled labor time. It feels like your prediction would say that all of these things would roughly have the same value, but the prices would like fluctuate wildly in the market depending on what they're producing.
What
right?
prediction? I don't understand. What prediction are you talking about?
If you're saying that you can take the quantity of labor that goes into a given commodity, then you should be able to determine the value of that commodity. No? Or am I misunderstanding you still?
Yeah, what I'm saying is...
Wait. Did I misunderstand you, or did what I said make sense?
You'll have to repeat it.
Okay, let me say this one more time. So it feels like what you're telling me is that if I give you the quantity of socially necessary labor that goes into creating a certain thing, that you should be able to know the value of it, deductively so. Is that true or not?
Yeah, that's the average quantity of
I
unskilled
understand.
labor
Okay.
time
So
that
my
it takes
question
to
is-
produce a good
So
is the value.
So my question is it feels like I can take different commodities that I could produce with the same amount of socially necessary labor, and I would get wildly different prices for those things in the market based on their like demand. But I don't know if you account for demand in
Yeah,
labor
theory
value.
is not a theory of prices, so you could get prices that are markedly at variance with values.
So then how do you ever figure out when the price is where the value is? If you're telling me that like, well, the value is going to be what the price in the long-term equilibrium will settle
You
at.
don't need to figure that out.
So then what is value again? I'm sorry, can you explain one more time for me?
Yeah, so value is a theoretical unobservable that's postulated to explain equilibrium prices. It's understood that it will coincide with equilibrium prices under certain conditions. And in the conditions where it doesn't coincide with equilibrium prices, those that variance is something that can be understood as a systematic deviation from the value, right?
And then how do you determine like when it comes to like what units do we express a value in? Is it arbitrary?
You can express it in hours.
Okay, and then how do you make the calculation of like how much like socially necessary labor goes into producing a given commodity?
You're asking, how do we know in the case of a given commodity
Sure.
how much socially necessary labor time was expended?
Mhm.
You'd have to be able to open the books of all the different firms to know that.
Does it take into account things like education or productivity, like access to capital, or
I'm not sure what you mean by take into account.
what do you?
education.
Okay, what do
I
you?
mean,
what do you? What do you?
education
What do you
isn't a
think?
factor
What do you?
of
What do you? What do you think I mean by that? I don't
know
understand
why
how I
you're
talk to these people and they have no fucking idea what the fuck I'm saying. Okay, so clearly there's probably, if I were to try to wire a house to an electrical grid, or if I were to try to wire a house's electrical shit up, it would take me a lot longer than an electrician, right? So it seems like that education is probably somewhat relevant to figuring out like that socially necessary labor number, right? No? Am I wrong? Or
So you're talking about how degrees of skill can be understood as varying in some way that's correlated with degrees of education.
yes, that, and then the access to capital as well. So for instance, a
Yeah,
really good
But
construction.
I'm
Yeah.
not seeing why the education has to be appealed to if what we're concerned with is the average degree of skill when it comes to a certain.
Well, because the average degree of
Concrete
skill
labor.
might be far different from one worker to the next, right? So if you say
Yeah,
that,
so we're talking about an average.
okay, but I don't know if an average, the average seems quite meaningless here, I guess.
So there's an average quantity of labor time
Uh-huh.
that it takes to produce a certain good. Does that seem meaningless?
Yes.
Why does it seem meaningless that there's an average quantity of labor time that it takes to produce a certain good? I don't get it.
Because if we're given a set of data and we've got values that kind of gather around two different points, a high and a low point, an average here is literally worthless, right? We wouldn't take an average here because it would be misleading in terms of the data. So if we had a group
I
of
don't get it. So you've got.
Wait, hold on.
you've
What
got
don't you
a
get?
number-
Wait.
I'll
Hold on.
explain it to
No.
you.
Hold
I'll
on. Let me.
explain
No.
to you
Hold
how
on. Wait.
it's
Let me
supposed to
just explain what I just said. You keep saying I don't get it. Like I don't understand what world you exist in. Okay. So what I'm telling you is that if I give you a set of data, okay, and that set has 5 1s and 5 10s, and you say, oh well, the average is like 5.5, so that's a good representation of that data. We both know, or I hope you know, that's not a good representation of the data. The average there is misleading. That's what I'm saying.
I don't.
Okay?
I don't know what the norm is that you're appealing to.
What do
But
you
I'll
mean?
just
This is a
explain-
stats 101.
I'll
Hold on.
just
Do you need
explain-
Do you need me to explain what I just said about like why averages are
It's
inadequate?
not really
sometimes?
relevant, right? I'll just tell you what it is, since you're claiming not to understand it, right? So let's say there's a specific good, right? Let's say it's a chair, right? Let's say there are 100 different firms that produce that chair, right? There's going to be varying
He's
amounts
like getting off to this
of
conversation.
labor time expended across the different firms producing those chairs. right? Some firms can produce 100 chairs in 10 hours. Others will produce 100 chairs in 20 hours, right? You just add up the total number of labor hours and the total number of chairs, right? And you're going to be able to divide by the number of chairs, right? And you're going to be able
I understand
to get,
you can do that. I don't know why it took you. I understand you can do this, but this is such a wholly worthless number. Like what? Like
what? Why is it worthless?
because. Do you want to? I mean, like we can go over the difference of like median, mode, average, range. Like if we want to do like really basic sets of numbers and how we look at them. I don't know how far back I need to go to talk about like why.
I'm just trying to understand why it's worthless. Right?
It's worthless because the social. Because if somebody tells me, I'm sure I understand. I know what you're telling me.
I'm just telling you that's what the value is on the theory, right?
Sure, and I'm just explaining to you
when
that
you say it's worthless, right? Presumably that's worthless with respect to some aim, right? So what aim is it that the theory is attempting to target, right? But that is worthless with respect to.
I don't understand what socially necessary labor means, I guess. I don't know what that value means or why we care about it, other than the fact that
I just told you what it meant, right? It means average quantity of unskilled labor time that it takes to reproduce a good at a given time or place.
And that average
right?
quantity could be an average of ones and 100s, and it might average out to 50, but that's what it is.
I don't see what difference any of that makes.
I understand
right?
you don't see.
I'm just telling you.
What's the next point?
I'm just telling you that's what is understood to be what determines value
Sure.
on the theory, right?
Sure.
Now, what's the objection?
I don't understand the utility of it. I don't understand the utility of any of this.
So you don't have an objection, right? You're just saying you don't understand the theory, which is fine, right? If you don't understand the theory, that's perfectly fine, right? Then you just say, I don't understand the theory, right? But that's not what you do, right? You say the theory is bunk, it's worthless, it doesn't make any sense, right?
It might make perfect sense. The theory might make perfect sense. The theory might make perfect sense. I'm not saying that your theory doesn't make sense. I'm not saying that your theory doesn't make sense.
Okay.
It might make perfect sense. Okay.
Great.
All I'm saying is I don't know what the utility of the theory is. That's it.
I told you what the utility of the theory is.
The utility
right?
is that it predicts a variable that only that theory talks about. Who cares?
What difference? You don't think that?
That I care about the Marxian definition of value? No, I don't care about that. Who cares? No one cares about that. You yourself have said multiple times, value doesn't necessarily map onto price, so who cares?
If the theory predicts that there are going to be economic crises, right? Or if the theory predicts that capitalism can't evolve indefinitely into the future without breaking down.
I think it might. Who knows? Maybe it will.
Yeah, but that would be something that people would care about, right?
It could be, but Marx himself thought that the capitalist system would break down in his lifetime.
Sorry.
And now we hear that it's going to break down 100 years from now. So
just a minute. I'm just addressing the point where you
Okay.
said, who cares, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there is a reason to care that people might have, right?
Not for something that is equivalent to Nostradamus predicts economics. No,
Sorry, you haven't established that.
I don't have to establish that. No one uses this theory anymore, and it's predicted the downfall of capitalism for over 100 years, and it hasn't happened. I'm sorry.
First of all, sorry.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah. So look, I'm not interested in the smart-ass comments.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
Is your view that the theory is bunk or not?
My view is that I have never in my life been given a problem and I thought, man, I don't understand this problem at all. And then somebody is like, oh, well, if we analyze this from an LTV perspective, now we have way more, we've got a better tool to make sense of this problem. And then it's like, oh, shit, you know what? Yeah, totally. I didn't understand, and now I do. Now this is helpful.
So let's get clear on this.
Mm-hmm. You said you don't, and then it cuts
You don't
off.
claim that the theory is false. Is that right?
The theory, what does it mean to be false? I mean, as long as it adheres to all of its definitions, it could be internally consistent.
I didn't ask you if it was internally consistent. That's a different claim, right? The theory makes predictions about how capitalist societies should evolve.
Can you walk me through like one clear?
Wait a minute.
You're not going to. You're going to speak in vague generalities. All right, go ahead.
Wait a minute. I just want to get clear on this, right? Yeah. Your claim is not that the theory is false. Is that right?
Well, it depends on what you mean by false. Is it internally consistent or does it make accurate predictions?
I didn't ask you if it was internally consistent.
Okay, well, what are you asking me?
Is not internally consistent?
I'm sure. I would hope it is.
So you don't think the theory is internally inconsistent, right?
I don't know the LTV enough thoroughly to know whether or not it's internally consistent.
You don't know it well enough to know if it's internally consistent.
Correct.
You know it well enough to know whether it's false or not?
I don't. It depends on what you mean by false.
So you understand, right, that there are propositions. That what predictions are propositions, right? We should expect to see X, right, over time. Mm-hmm. Right. So let's say a rising rate of exploitation, right? We should expect to see a rising rate of exploitation over time, right? That's a prediction of the theory, right?
Why would the theory predict that? Can you walk me through that?
Again, I can walk you through it if you want to take the time and have a seminar on the LTV.
Can you explain it to me in less than like 3 minutes?
No, I can't.
Okay, start talking and I'll go ahead. Go for it. Then just start talking. Right? Then do it in 5 or 10 minutes or 20 minutes. Go explain it. Why?
So you want to have a seminar on the labor theory of value, right?
Yeah, now? I want you to tell me why we would expect to see less and less or more exploitation of workers.
All right. So let's start with the basic formula for capital.
Okay.
I'm sorry, for value.
Okay.
Right. The formula for value, the value of a commodity, is C plus V plus S. Right?
Okay.
C is constant capital. Constant capital refers to what are sometimes called capital goods in mainstream economic theories. So it's going to be basically the goods, the material goods that go into production that are not actually labor, right? So it's going to be
like natural resources, right?
It's going to be labor. I'm sorry. It's going to be machinery, tools.
Well, hold on. I thought that those things count as having had labor enacted on them prior to this. So, for instance,
the value of capital goods is going to be broken down into further components of C, V, and S. V being labor inputs.
Okay.
And if you keep breaking down the C, right, eventually all you're going to have are labor inputs.
Gotcha.
So the idea is that all capital inputs can be broken down into labor inputs.
Okay.
So, so C is going to refer to buildings, machinery, raw materials, energy inputs, and other types of auxiliary products that are necessary in the production process, things like soap or lubricants and so on, right? Now, then there are labor inputs. That's V. And basically, inputs of V are measured, well, what's understood to be the value of V is the value of the goods that are necessary to reproduce the worker's capacity to work a given number of hours, right? So the amount of, say, part of it is going to be physical needs, right? So the amount of food that you need to consume, and there may be the other needs that figure into the average wage, right? And that's going to be the value of that's going to determine the value of the labor power of the worker, right? And so V represents the quantity of the labor power of the workers employed in production of a given good. Now, the third input is surplus value. Surplus value is a differential between the total amount of value produced by the worker within, let's say, a work day, and the value of the worker's labor power. So if you take the total value the worker produces and you subtract from that the value of the worker's labor power, which is essentially the average wage, you get surplus value, right? Now, if you add that up, C plus V plus S, right, you'll get the value of the commodity. That's the formula for value, right?
Gotcha. Okay. So we got to value. All right. Can I just, just to make sure that I understand this. So we have, it was C plus V plus what equals the commodity?
S, surplus value.
Okay. So C was the initial capital that could
Constant
also be
capital,
constant capital. They could also be broken down into the same formula. And then we have V, which is this is the
variable capital.
Okay, which
that
is
means,
labor.
That means
right?
that's the value of labor power.
Yep. Okay.
And S, which is surplus value.
Okay. Equals are good. Okay. What is the? Okay, gotcha. All right. Okay.
Now, how is it that from this we can develop a theory of the dynamics of capitalist production? Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, we need to understand that that profit has its origin in surplus value. Right. So the idea is that C and V represent the initial capital outlay of the capitalist, right? The capitalist is engaged in production because he can make a profit, right? So if all he did was merely reproduce the counter value of his initial capital outlay, there'd be no incentive to risk his money in production, right? So it's because the worker agrees to work 8 hours, right? Let's say, but produces the value of his wage in just 4 hours of labor, right? That the capitalist is able to earn a profit on the theory, right? Because the capitalist, what the worker has agreed to as part of the labor contract is he's just turning over his labor power to the capitalist for the 8 hours, right? But he doesn't get to keep the goods that are produced at the end.
Isn't he adding his labor value to that constant capital though? Why is he entitled to the surplus labor if he's only adding to somebody else's constant capital?
I'm not sure what you mean by entitled. I'm just saying that's
what do you think I meant when I asked that? Sure. What do you think I meant when I asked that? Can you?
Well, I don't know whether you were referring to some kind of moral notion or some kind of legal notion, right? Legally, I'm not making any moral claims at all, right? And the theory doesn't make any moral claims. It's not a normative theory.
Sure, I understand. I guess you made it sound like you work 8 hours to produce like a given 4 hours of surplus labor or whatever.
That's right. You engage in 4 hours of surplus labor and therefore would produce on that basis 4 hours worth of surplus value, right?
Okay.
So if the value of the commodity, the finished good, is C plus V plus S, right? If that sells at its value, which is to say if the value is realized, right? That means that the capitalist, upon sale, receives a remuneration which is equivalent to the counter value of his initial capital outlay. So it covers the costs of his initial outlay, right? And then there's this amount that's left over that he gets to pocket. Now, he may have to pay out certain expenses out of that, right? They're going to be things like taxes, interest to lenders. They're going to be rents that he might pay to the landlord who leases him the land that his factory is on, let's say. And there might be other costs that are not actually costs that contribute to the qualities of the finished good. things like advertising, insurance,
I got it. Lots of other stuff.
and so on. But whatever's left over after all those payments is going to be profit, what Marx calls profit of enterprise, right? So that's on the theory. That's the reason why the capitalist is willing to risk his money, because since the worker agrees to a contract which whereby the worker will produce more value than the value of his wage, the capitalist is able to earn a profit, right? Now, how does this basic understanding of commodities allow us to develop a theory of the dynamics of capitalist production? Well, here's a basic understanding. Here's an outline of the basic mechanism, or at least one of the basic mechanisms that will drive that, right? So, given that capitalists are engaged in competition, right, for market share, there's going to be an incentive for capitalists to cut their costs in relation to their right.
I think I cut off for a second.
Sorry about that. Yeah, there's going to be a incentive for capitalists to cut their costs vis-a-vis their rivals in production, right? Because then they could, for instance, win a price war with their competitors and capture a larger market share. And they'll also earn a higher rate of profit if they do so, right? If they succeed in cutting costs, right? And one way they can do that is by adopting labor-saving technologies. So, if you adopt a labor-saving technology.
Wait, hold on, just so I understand. That's not the only way to do it, right? That's just one way to do it, or?
Yeah, there might be other ways,
okay.
Right? But
yeah,
there's going to be a persistent drive. The idea is that there's going to be a persistent drive for capitalists to find ways to cut costs by adopting labor-saving technologies. So let's look at how this affects the formula for value so we can understand how it generates a kind of dynamic in the development of the mode of production, right? So let's say, let's imagine a hypothetical good. Let's say, I don't know, let's say some kind of fancy bicycle that costs, let's say the value of the bicycle is, I don't know, let's say it's, let's say that the typical,
dude, fuck me. Oh my God.
Let's say that the value of constant capital across that sector of production in a given production cycle is going to be something like, I don't know, let's say $1,000, right? And let's say that in that same production cycle, $1,000 worth of variable capital is employed. So the cost of labor, the average cost of labor in that sector of production in that production cycle will be $1,000. And let's say that the rate of surplus value is 100%, right? So that means for every dollar that is employed in hiring workers, an additional dollar will be generated in production of surplus value, right? And so that means, so if the rate of surplus value is 100%, that means that if the variable capital is $1,000, the rate of surplus value will be $1,000, right? Now,
There must be a quicker way to speak. I can't.
that means
This
that
right? There
the
has to be.
formula
We're
C
like
plus V plus S will be 1,000
3
plus
sentences
1,000 plus
into the wiki
1,000.
right now.
So
Okay,
the
we could have read the
quantity of
whole
value
wiki
of the finished product
on labor theory value.
with that initial outlay
Oh my
will
god.
be $3,000, right? Now, the rate of profit, the formula for the rate of profit is S over C plus V. So a rate of profit is going to be 1,000 over 2,000. So you're going to have a very high rate of profit of 50% on your total capital outlay. Right? Now, let's imagine that a capitalist decides to adopt a labor-saving technology in order to cut his production costs. So let's say he employs an additional $200 worth of constant capital relative to his competitors, right? Let's imagine he's the only person. Let's imagine he's the first person to do this. So nobody else in that sector of production has adopted.
Sure.
this new
Just to
technology.
fast forward a little bit. So the idea is that he's going to employ some cost-saving capital. He's going to add to his constant
right.
capital, right? And then other people are going to be driven to compete. They're going to add their own cost-saving capital. And given that we use this formula to predict the future value, we expect to see that the compensation for the labor is going to decrease as that second variable gets smaller and smaller as time goes on, right?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah.
So wouldn't this only hold true for one given commodity? Couldn't we envision that additionally, like newly created goods and services happen over time, and then you start that formula over and over again? Is there any reason to think that we wouldn't be creating new goods and services constantly in the future?
Well, theory isn't. It's not no part of the theory to. The theory doesn't predict that there can't be new goods and services. Right?
Okay, so
what it's saying is that this dynamic is going to be found in every sector of production.
Yeah, I understand that, but so my initial question that I think we're on our way to is, what does the LVT predict? What is a good prediction from this that this model helps us for? And I think that right now we're on our way to explaining how owners, capitalists, will constantly minimize the costs of labor. They will decrease that second variable, and over time we would expect to see workers' exploitation increase. But my question is doesn't this? It seems like a central part of this, and explaining how this LVT formula works here, is this formula is relative to a particular commodity. That as a new commodity is created, a lot of these numbers are probably going to reset. So if we employ some cost-saving capital initially, that cost-saving capital, that first variable, is not going to necessarily hold true for the next commodity that's created. We might need a whole new form of capital investment at that point. And then if we can break that cycle, and now you can agree or disagree that that's possible, I would argue that we can, that new capital will be required for new jobs in the future. If that's the case, then can't we argue that we're always going to be in this constant back and forth, and you won't see this rate of wage compensation falling into the future because we can constantly create new goods and services?
I'm not really.
He's going to say, "I
seeing
don't
how
understand."
Creating new goods and services is supposed to alter the fact that there's going to be a tendency for the rate of profit to decline.
Sure, but my argument is that the tendency of the rate of profit to decline is only bad if we think that this is approaching zero, or if we think it's going to decrease continuously over time and get smaller and smaller and smaller. My contention is that if we create a new good or service, if we create a new commodity, every time we do it, that rate of profit is going to rise initially and then fall again. So rather than the rate of profit falling over long periods of times, it will fall and rise and fall and rise and fall and rise as new commodities are created.
I wasn't saying anything about the decline in the rate of profit as being something bad, right? But I was trying to do.
No, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying that it sounds like that as that happens over time, we're going to say that workers are continuously exploited. And what I'm saying is that if a new commodity is created, then that exploitation counter is going to kind of reset. That all the variables, that constant capital and all that is going to reset because now we have a new commodity that we're working with.
You mean that if another commodity becomes obsolete?
Yes.
Is that the idea?
Yeah.
Well, the theory isn't saying that there aren't going to be commodities that become obsolete, right?
But if we're constantly
just-
creating new commodities, doesn't that mean then that we're not worried about a future potential where workers are increasingly exploited? That it might just be the case that as new commodities are created, the level of exploitation remains roughly the same over time?
Well, again, I wasn't trying to raise any kind of worry, right? I was merely trying to.
I'm not talking about okay. I'm not trying to ascribe any moral claims. I'm not trying to make it this normative, as you said. I'm not trying to do that. Okay. I asked you initially, what is a prediction that the labor theory of value makes that is like something novel or something that I couldn't understand under my current way of understanding economics? And now you're talking to me about all the factors that go into the LVT formula, and you're saying, well, one prediction. Now, if I'm misquoting you, feel free to correct me, okay? But what you said earlier, or what I heard earlier, was one prediction is that as time goes on, the labor is going to be increasingly exploited, that exploitation is going to increase. And the way that you're beginning to demonstrate this to me is the addition of more and more constant capital, that first variable, is going to cause a decrease in that second variable. And what I'm challenging that with is I'm saying that that constant capital increase may decrease variable 2, but that only holds true for one given commodity. That as commodities become obsolete and new commodities form and new constant capital is required, the compensation to that second variable is maybe remains roughly constant over time. It doesn't decrease as time goes on.
I'm not understanding how you're.
How does he not understand anything? I don't understand. What the fuck?
That we should expect to see the what's called the composition of capital, right, to remain the same or something like that.
So like here,
economy-wide.
So let's use a real world example, okay? And I'll see if I can understand all of our factors of production here, or whatever, and see if I understand this, okay? So let's say that we have a huge warehouse where we store documents, okay? So we have, in this warehouse, we have giant filing cabinets, okay? I'm going to call that C. And then we also have workers that we bring in that we have to pay a wage, and they go through the filing cabinets. We'll call that V. And then you let's say that the W, the product, the commodity you're selling at the end is like access to these documents to some company, and you charge them money.
That's not. See, the access to documents is not going to be understood to be something that has a value.
Wait, what do you mean? Can I not analyze services using the LVT?
Most services probably not.
80% of our economy is a service economy. I can't understand any services using the labor theory of value?
I didn't say any, right? I specifically said most, probably not, right?
Well, most...
So yeah, most services are not actually going to be understood to be value producing on the labor theory of value.
Okay, let's use a different example, okay? Let's say that we're making cars, okay? So I've got my constant capital is going to be my tools. We've got the our V variable is going to be the workers that we pay to work on things. S is going to be the surplus value that's created when V acts on C, I think, right? And then W is our car sold at the end, right?
Okay.
Okay. So it seems like what our worry is that over time, as capitalists seek to minimize V, they're going to add more to C, and they're going to minimize V, and that's a trend that we would expect to see over time. That as the capitalists adds more and more tools to their arsenal of car-making stuff, that wage labor is going to be compensated less and less, and we would tend to see that fall over time. Is that an okay understanding of what we're saying?
Well, what I'm saying is that what the theory predicts is that that of the total value product, right, the amount of it which is surplus value is going to increase over time, proportional to the amount of it which is workers' wages. So
yeah, so for instance, if we added more tools, if we added more to our constant capital, the surplus value would remain the same, but the wage compensation would decrease. We would expect to see that over time, right?
Well, given that the technologies being adopted are labor saving, right?
Of course, we're going to assume that's what the constant capital added would be, is labor saving. It's not just for kicks, right?
Yeah, because it's labor saving. there's the, I guess one way to think about it is that the weighting of constant capital to variable capital is going to increase.
The ratio
on the
would
side
increase, yes, on the
Yeah.
side of the constant capital, yes, right?
That's right. Yeah.
35.
That's what we would expect to see over time. So what I'm saying is that that particular formula, okay, that's relative to a single commodity. Do you understand that?
Yeah, but the point is that the same. Yeah, there are going to
No.
be different formulas in
Yes,
different
okay.
industries.
But what
So
I'm
there's
saying is
some-
that if we expect to see the ratio of C to V increase over time, that's going to be with respect to a given commodity, to that one formula. However, let's say in the future we go from making cars to flying vehicles. We're going to get a whole new formula where the ratio of C to V might reset completely. And that those might be further replaced by some other commodity where the ratio of C to V resets completely. So what I'm saying is that it seems like we would only expect to see that ratio of C to V. We would only expect to see that increase indefinitely over and over and over again. And we'd expect to see that to increase to hugely large numbers only within a single given commodity. But if we're constantly creating new commodities, I don't know if we would expect to see that tendency over time.
Oh, what I'm trying to understand is why would you think that the replacement rate of new commodities for old commodities would be like highly labor intensive? Why would you think that the majority of those
Because the
new
productivity of
commodities
labor
would
sure.
be highly
Yeah,
labor
because the
intensive
productivity
rather than highly capital?
because it seems like the productivity of labor has grown tremendously as time has gone on.
How does that generate that prediction?
How does what
Because
generate that
I'll
prediction?
grant you that the theory does predict that there will be increasing productivity of labor, right? That is a prediction of the theory, right? So I'm granting to you that we should expect to see increase in labor productivity, right? What I'm trying to understand is how an increase in labor productivity generates a predictive expectation that as new commodities are created, that those industries that develop in order to produce those commodities will, on balance, be highly labor intensive rather than highly capital intensive. I don't understand.
I don't know if they'd be highly labor intensive, but I think that it's possible that the intensity of the labor might hold somewhat constant with the relationship to capital. That's a possibility. I'm not saying that's definitely going to happen. I'm saying we have to acknowledge that that is possible.
I mean, I'm not really sure why it would be important. What would turn on conceding that it's possible, right?
Well, because if you
Unless
were to
I think-
concede that, then we would get rid of
unless
the
I-
entire prediction of the LVT to say that like compensation to workers is going to fall indefinitely in the future.
Saying that something is possible, right, is not any kind of concession, right? What would be a concession would be that it was likely, because then what's expected on the theory, then it would just not be the case that what's said to be expected on the theory is in fact expected on the theory.
So at what point then, if for our highly predictive model, I guess, at what point then do we expect to see the compensation of wages to workers fall to approaching zero or at some unsustainable level?
I don't have a prediction of that kind.
So what are we
Right.
predicting again with the LVT?
We're saying that one of the predictions of the theory is that as a secular tendency, we should see a declining share of the total value product accruing to workers relative to the share accruing to capital.
And why? Can you explain to me why I can't understand this in like conventional economic terms? Why do I need the LVT to understand this?
So, what I think is the case is that that's what's called a novel prediction of the theory. Are you familiar with the idea of predictive novelty?
Predicting
philosophy,
something new that hasn't been predicted before, or something unique to a
Yeah,
particular
see,
theory.
the reason why predictive novelty is significant is that it's sort of taken to be a highly, well, what's called highly virtuous explanatorily with respect to a theory. So, in other words, the idea is that if you have a theory that correctly predicts novel facts, that's like taken to be extremely strong corroboration of the theory.
Well,
It's
if
not
if the
merely
novel
that it
things
predicts-
actually happen, though, right?
That's right. That's right. So if you can design a theory to predict something that you know about, right? And if it, so you might have some observed phenomenon, and you can design a theory to explain that, right? But although you can say that your theory is corroborated on that basis, it's kind of like a weak confirmation of the theory relative to a theory that not only predicts what's observed, but predicts things that are unexpected, right? Because if you correctly predict several things that are unexpected,
Of course.
that's
Is there
taken
an
to be
example?
like strong corroboration.
Sure. Is there an example of a novel prediction the labor theory of value made that ended up being correct that nobody else was able to understand economically?
Well, it depends on what you mean by nobody else is able to understand economics.
So more like neoclassical or more conventional like economic theories.
Yeah. So the thing is, here's the basic case, right? Like an outline. The basic case for the theory is that the theory generates, let's say, 11, maybe 12 basic predictions, which are kind of like long-term trends, primarily in the evolution of capitalist societies, right? Now, there may be other ways you can independently confirm the theory, right? But one of the main ways, or maybe the main way you can confirm the theory is by looking at these main 11 or 12 so-called laws of motion of the capitalist mode of production that are predictions of the theory, right? Now, so the claim is that all or nearly all of those predictions are actually novel predictions.
Okay.
Right.
So
All
okay,
of
so
them
it
have
seems like
come
we've taken.
true.
Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah. So okay. So let me try to recenter this. Okay. So what I'm asking very simply is there a novel prediction that the LVT made that came true that wasn't predicted by any other model? Not are there tons of new predictions that haven't come true yet?
That's what I was trying to get. No, I think they've all. Well, I think all the main ones have come true.
Okay. Can you just
right?
talk to me about one? Just one that nobody
Yeah,
else predicted.
declining. Yeah, decline. Well, when you say nobody else, so this is the point, right? The point is you can construct a model after a trend has been observed.
But then it wouldn't be novel. We both
That's
know.
right.
Okay, yeah, that's not
right.
what I'm saying.
Yeah,
We
so-
both
so
know that's
what
what
I'm
I'm saying,
saying-
right? Okay,
Yeah,
it
so what
has
I'm
to be
saying
something
is-
besides the tendency of the rate of profits fall because it's still contested. People don't even agree on that one yet. Are there any other like predictions, any other novel predictions that the LVT made that no other prior constructed model, not one that was constructed to
Yeah,
explain?
so
Yeah.
there's about 11 or 12.
Can you give me one of them?
Yeah, I gave you one. I said that there's a declining share of value of the total value product.
Can you
accruing.
give me a second one? What's another
Yeah,
one?
there should be increasing centralization of capital. Sorry, let me give you a different one.
Oh, well,
Increasing
wait.
concentration.
Yeah, is-
increasing concentration of capital.
How would no aren't these well understood under most like economic models? So we have like terms like an economy of scale. We've got like more efficient production by larger firms. Like wouldn't this be understood traditionally?
Yeah, so I mean, you can have a debate about whether in 1867, right, these were all novel predictions, right? Some economists are going to claim that they are, right? You could have a debate about that, right? I don't think a lot is going to turn on that question, right? Because I don't think within what might be called subjective value theory, mainstream economics, there are models that exist that explain the ensemble of predictions predicted by the labor theory of value, right? So there's plenty of post hoc models that can explain each of those predictions, well, at least maybe not all of them, but several of those predictions singly, right? So the reason why the labor theory of value can be understood to be to be abductively highly virtuous, right, is A, because it makes several correct predictions, right, which is going to be like roughly a dozen maybe of a specific type, right, these long-term trend type predictions. The vast majority of those are going.
Your thing cut off.
Sorry.
Yeah.
The vast majority of those are going to be novel predictions, and the whole set is explained by a single model, right? Now, I don't think that there is in subjective value theory any theory that has explanatory power of the same scope, right, or that is predictively novel, right, on the same scale as the labor theory of value, right, which is the reason why I think that the labor theory of value is, one of the most robust theories in terms of empirical soundness in the social sciences. That's my claim.
Why don't any contemporary economists use the labor theory of value to understand anything real, like contemporaneously about economics?
Well, I can just offer you a speculation about that, right? Because I don't actually think that it would be something that would be acceptable to the people who endow academic institutions if the economic theory that was taught in those institutions was that the source of all profit lies in exploitation, right? I don't think that's actually acceptable.
Couldn't we just call it, you said it's not a normative theory, so couldn't, instead of exploitation, couldn't we just give it another word? So you're saying that all of academia, all economists are all kind of like lying to themselves, knowing that there's a superior theory out there, but none of them will engage with it because...
I didn't say they were lying to themselves, right? I'm just saying that there's a kind of... My speculation is that there's a kind of filter built into the academy whereby academic ideas that actually are in some way challenging to the prerogatives of the people who endow academic institutions are going to be disincentivized. The people who do endow those institutions are going to be disincentivized to endow institutions or departments or chairs or whatever.
Wouldn't it be the case that if like one university like wanted to make a name for itself and it started employing like a whole bunch of Marxist econ professors that started making all of these accurate predictions about the economy, wouldn't we expect to see this type of thought enter the mainstream incredibly quickly? Like this one university would come out and like boom, 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 look at all these accurate predictions we made. Like this is such, wouldn't we expect to see more people adopt that type of thought?
I don't have that expectation. I think that things that actually threaten ruling class prerogatives, right, are not actually going to flourish or attract money.
So we think the ruling class controls academic institutions, or at least exerts enough influence over them to...
I think they're the ones who endow universities, right?
And they do this on like a worldwide level, because it seems like the Marxist stuff isn't very popular in Europe.
It doesn't. Yeah, well, capitalism is the reigning mode of production in almost every country in the world, right? There's like maybe 2, maybe 3 countries where it no longer is the reigning model. No longer is the reigning mode of production. So in those countries, I think we would expect to see that Marxist economics would be taken more seriously.
Okay. Well, is there anything else you want to go over?
No, I just wanted to get clarity on this point, right? Because people have been contacted. I've actually spoken to you before. I'm sure you don't remember that. Probably like a couple of years ago in your server, I was invited in a couple of times because you were talking about the labor theory of value, and I was asked by, I think, some Marxist people who were, in your voice channel to come in because I'm somewhat known, on the internet as a defender of the labor theory of value. I've had, at least like one or two prominent debates that, like in the Marxist part of the internet, were like, well known, right? And so I actually came in to sort of correct a few points, and you were very gracious about it and said, yeah, well, I guess I misunderstood. Thank you for correcting me. Something like that, right? And that was sort of the end of that. But shortly afterwards, or at least, several months later or something, people started to say you were attacking the labor theory of value, and they asked me if I would have a conversation with you about it to address that, right? Now, I, said, well, I would look into it, but for whatever reason, a long time has passed since those people started contacting me, and the issue came up again because of your discussions with Pogan and Richard Wolff, right? And I understood you to be saying that the theory is bullshit, right?
I will say that after this conversation, my opinion is wholly unchanged. But
okay, well, so do you think you can make an argument that the theory is bullshit? Because
half of it is gonna. I mean, so I feel like our first problem is the idea that we can't explain like 80% of the economy because we have no way to analyze services. When I think we can do that, like with a marginalist framework, it seems a little sus to me. Or does that? Do you not care about that? Or I'm curious how do you square that away in your head that you have no?
Yeah. So, so the labor theory of value is part of the view that the source of all value lies in the productive sectors, and so the profits that are accrued in services are actually sucked out, so to speak, of the productive sectors of the economy. Right?
So let's say that. So let's. I know we get really uncomfortable when I ask LBTers to do this, but let's try to use a real world example. Let's say that we set up a massage parlor outside. We have people lay on the ground and we just give them back rubs. How does that service take money out of like the productive or the manufacturing or whatever other sectors? Can you explain that?
Well, I'm just saying that on the theory, it doesn't actually generate value, right? You're paid for the service, right? And if your costs are lower than what you're paid, right, you can earn a profit in that sector. I'm just saying that from a theoretical point of view, right, from the point of view of this theory, the LTV, there's no actual value being generated in that in that sector. What's happening is that value is flowing into the sector in the form of payments, right? And those payments happen to be greater than the costs that it takes to undertake those services, and so therefore those people can earn a profit. But it's not in any way, I don't see why that's some kind of problem for the theory, right?
Because it seems to me that this theory is like, it exists like very much on like the very fringe margins in terms of making some very grand predictions about the economy in the future. But in terms of like day-to-day understanding of like economics, it just has zero, it seems like it offers almost no utility.
Okay, so what I wanted to understand was, see, I'm still not clear on what your position is, right? That's
your thing just cut off again.
Sorry, I'm still trying to understand what your position is, right? Because what I was trying to, that's why I kept asking you, are you claiming that the theory is inconsistent, A? Are you claiming that it's false, B? Are you claiming that it's circular, C? Are you claiming that it's unfalsifiable, D? Are you claiming that it's ad hoc, E? right? Are you
Okay.
claiming that
okay.
what?
Okay. So just to be clear, you just said the same thing like 5 times. All I'm saying is that I don't think there's much utility out of it. That's all I'm saying. That's that. I'll say that again. I think I've said that before. It might be wholly consistent. We could generate any theory we want out of a set of axioms, and it could be consistent and wholly whatever. But my problem is that I just don't think it offers much utility. I don't think it like maps onto reality much. I don't see much predictive power in it, other than these like 11 or 12 novel things that it seems like you said other economic models already can predict and explain. And then also the fact that it doesn't seem to account for, or at least the value has no mapping on a price for like 80% of our economy seems to be pretty troublesome as well.
Yeah. Well, so again, I see. That's why I was. See, you raised a number of points there, so I'd have to address each of those in turn, right? So you said that it was troublesome that it doesn't provide a. It's not a theory of the service sector. And see, I'm trying to understand why that's a problem for the theory, right? The existence of services doesn't, the fact that services could be the dominant part of the economy, none of that actually contradicts the theory. So I'm not understanding why that's a problem.
It feels like I have no useful way by which to map that value that the LTV produces onto anything that exists in the service sector. So why would I ever use this form of analysis, or why would I care about any predictions that it makes?
Well,
You're then cut off again.
Sorry. The reason why the form of analysis is taken to be valuable is that it describes the evolution of the capitalist economy, right? And it's highly corroborated.
Okay,
right?
real quickly, hold on, real quick, because you keep repeating this. I don't care that it can explain something. I'm asking for novel because we've got competing theories that explain things, right? So my question is, why would I use? Because you're the one making the affirmative argument for the LVT, right? So I'm just asking why this over something else that seems to be more widely accepted, like ubiquitously around the world.
Yeah, because those theories are not as highly corroborated as the labor theory of value, right? And because they're not as highly corroborated, they're therefore less valuable in terms of understanding the future dynamics of capitalist system, right? If we want to understand how the capitalist system is going to evolve, right? If that's what we're interested in, right? Because you do understand, right? I know. See, I'm not really interested in debating socialism.
I understand. Now that this guy says he's famous for internet debates,
right,
this guy is like the Darth Dawkins of socialism,
Marxists,
probably.
Right?
That's what I'm
Part
doing
of the
right now.
rationale
Fuck
for
me.
socialism is because it's understood that on the labor theory of value, right, capitalism is not taken to be something, at least by some Marxists, to be something that can survive in the future, right? It's understood to be a contradictory mode of production and therefore to not be sustainable.
Does it seem weird that it's supposed to explain like so much of capitalism, yet it seems inadequate to account for like 80% of the economy, or like every economic sector trying to transform into service economies?
I'm not sure what you mean by by inadequate, right?
What do you think I mean by inadequate?
Sorry, the theory doesn't purport to be a theory of the service sector, right? It's a theory of the productive sectors of the economy, right? But it understands that all value in the economy has its origin in the productive sectors and is therefore the source of the profits that are accrued in the service sector, right?
All right, so you're telling me the labor theory of value isn't convinced with services, or doesn't concern itself with services?
Well, it doesn't offer a theory, right, of some kind of like equilibrium price for services, or at least for most services. There are some services which are taken to be productive, but
okay. So if you're giving me like a theory of value that only accounts for physical, then it's only physical goods, or?
Yeah. My view is that labor theory of value is a theory of material good.
Well, so how do you
But
do?
what
How do
it's
you deal
saying
with
is-
what do you do when you've got like physical goods that have some service involved in them? Like I can posit several real world examples or hypotheticals where services product like and services have labor as an input. Shouldn't we theoretically be able to generate a value with them using your socially necessary labor? Shouldn't we be able to theoretically value those services using the LVT?
There are some services that are taken to be